Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
Perhaps you've heard the phrase, loose lips sink ships. What is that all about? Well, it really has to do with the fact that the ideas that you think you share in secret can be heard by those who have other intentions besides what you intended when you said it. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. I can tell you that the power of a leader speaking a word, just whispering an idea, starts a whole kind of snowball effect of the momentum and the energy behind that idea, whether they intended to or not, whether the idea is good or bad. And when you're a part of a leadership team, you should know that. I was listening just this morning to an interview with a couple of guys, and they were talking about how in the halls of Congress, there are newspapers that are left for Congress people and aides to pick up and read. And part of the conversation got around to the fact that these are newspapers from all over the place. There are some that are considered like the New York Post, the New York Times. These are, or the Washington Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times. These are papers of record. They've been around for 50, 60, 70 years. And so what you read in them, the Wall Street Journal about finance, things of that nature, those are pretty significant papers. They're articles, they're stories, they're journalists, they're editors, highly respected, most of them. And so the source of that information you would expect to be well vetted, well researched. They know what they're talking about. They have your best interest at heart. They're not just throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. These are not just new ideas that they're floating out there to see how people react to them. They're actually verifiable, fact-based stories, right? Then they found amongst these influential decision-making papers, you can imagine if you're called to the floor to vote on a bill, and all you hear is the title of that bill, and if you've done anything in politics, you know sometimes the title is as bad as the peanut butter around the pill. Oh, it tastes really good on the outside. You're going to get the dog to eat the pill. If the dog knew what the pill was, no amount of peanut butter would get them to take it, but just enough peanut butter. A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down? Yeah. About half the things that happen in politics, state house, local county government, city council, school board meeting, all the way to national and global politics. Probably half of it, the title, the headline, and the body of the text, they have nothing to do with each other. There's no relationship at all. The title, the headline, that's the peanut butter on the outside, and the pill is what's on the inside. That's the part you would have nothing to do with if you knew what was in there. And so research has to be done. Somebody has to look into this buzz in the chambers, the buzz in the hallway, the conversations that are going on around the coffee shop that probably there's more done in the coffee shop, in the hallway, when you run into a lobbyist in the Capitol building than actually happens on the floor of the House of the Senate. I'll just be honest with you. I know when I was in big corporate America, that was the case. Oh, there'd be emails flying all over the place. There'd be meetings and committees and teams and focus groups and blah, 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 blah. But on the way to the coffee shop, if you ran into the right person, in the elevator ride from the third floor to the first floor, you would get more done and make more decisions and have more final opportunities than anywhere else. Now, what does that have to do with a leader's words putting energy and momentum behind? See, here's what happens. And it happens on small scales when you run a landscaping company and you have 5 employees. And one employee comes around and says, the other day I was at so-and-so's house and they have this new Husqvarna mower and it was the best thing since sliced bread. You should try it. And the leader thinks, well, I've never seen one. I don't know anything about it. And they mentioned it to somebody, hey, so-and-so said the Husqvarna was the best mower in the world. And 2 weeks later, you come in and all the John Deeres are gone and they're all replaced with Husqvarnas. And you're like, whoa, what happened? Where did we get this $20,000 bill? We used to Husqvarna was better than John Deere. That was an idea that was floating around in my head. That was something we were talking about. That wasn't a decision. See how easily that happens? See what happens in the halls of Congress or at a school board or on the golf course. Is that somebody floats an idea that sounds like a reasonable idea. And when they float that idea, others kind of look at it and go, well, maybe, if. And so they take this idea from their common conversation and they escalate it into the inner circle. And in the inner circle, they mention that idea to the leader who makes the decision. And when the leader starts to repeat that idea, things happen. People hear a leader's verbalization of an idea and often will take it as marching orders. Now, there's some psychology that goes into that as well, because sometimes there are people in the inner circle and the only hope they have of rising to the next level of leadership is that the leader taps them and goes, "You've done a phenomenal job. I want you to take this forward." Sometimes they're really there to support the leader. They're part of this inner circle because they truly believe. I believe it was Tyler Perry who said, some people are leaves, some are branches, some are roots. The leaves, they leave when the wind blows, when things change. The branches, you can trust them for a little while, but in a big storm, the smaller branches, the weaker branches, the ones that haven't been around long, they're going to leave you too, along with the leaves. But the roots, those are the ones, they're not looking for show. They're not looking for title. They're not looking to be special. They're here to hold you firmly in the ground, and they will let you know when you're wrong. Those are the kind of people you want in your inner circle. Not a bunch of leaves, not a bunch of thin branches. You want the roots in your life. They're going to tell you when you're wrong or when you have lettuce in your teeth. If they're not going to tell you the truth, they're not going to serve you well. But the ideas that bubble up from outside the inner circle and then they make their way into the inner circle, they become a part of the inner circle conversation, and then they get uttered by the leader, and all of a sudden they've got momentum, they've got energy, they've got power. These words, they go from an abstract idea to an executive order in an instant. And the challenge is when you don't have an inner circle who can discern whether you're just thinking out loud or you're giving instruction, you have an inner circle that can take action on bad ideas. I recently heard someone say of a very powerful leader that when you're in their presence, if you mention to them things that are negative, that are downers, that are destructive, that are diversionary, that are distracting, they'll just tell you to shut up. I don't want to hear it. I have people whose job it is to think through those things, to deal with those bad ideas, those horrible what ifs, the contingencies that we hope never happen. I have people whose job it is to focus on those things, to identify those problems and solve them. I don't have time for that. I don't have energy for that. I don't want the authority of my words as a leader to back those things up, to give them power, to give them energy, to give them momentum. I don't want to speak them. So if you're in my inner circle, I don't want you speaking them. There are people whose inner circle, that's their job. Their job is to identify problems and bring a quick solution to them. That particular arena is not my problem. That's not my job. I don't want to give my energy to that problem. Now, I want you to think through that as a leader, and I want to ask you, have you found yourself in a place where people come into your inner circle and they bring the garbage of somebody else's conversation, somebody else's negative thoughts, somebody else's, for lack of a better word, propaganda, and they bring it into your circle? Now, I've seen journalists who are really good at piercing that inner circle veil, so to speak. They get that one-on-one interview with the leader and they ask what they believe are the tough questions, but they're gotcha questions that plant an idea that cause the leader to verbalize what otherwise they might have held their tongue on and said, A, I don't want to talk about that. B, it's not my job to think about that. And C, I don't want to give energy to those ideas. So mum's the word. Pass that on to somebody else who's supposed to be dealing with that. Leave it off my tongue. Leave it out of my head. And yet the journalist wants to throw that question out there and reel in that leader, pull them into a conversation that otherwise they would intentionally avoid. Now, the newspapers that are all over the halls of Congress, they are sources for ideas that bubble up in the periphery and end up in the conversation and make their way to the inner circle. Why? Well, because the aides may be asked by the legislator, hey, I've heard XYZ bill is coming up. It's coming up for a vote. I have not had time to do a lot of research on it. I need to trust you to do some research on it. So figure out everything you can about it and let me know how it aligns with our core values, our constituents, what we as a team have agreed that we believe should be happening. Is this a good bill or a bad bill? Who's behind it? What are the amendments that are attached to it? And what should we do with it? Now, the aide has been invited into the inner circle of this legislator because the aide has expressed their ability to be trustworthy. And the legislator is looking at this aide as an extension of themselves to say, I brought them into this circle because they've demonstrated they think like I do. They have the same values that I do. They make decisions that I would make. Maybe not the same level, but they're getting there. And I trust that when they give me advice, my authority behind their advice is going to make the right decision. And then we get back to these sources. See, China Daily is actually a CCP document. It's actually insider information straight off the presses in communist China. It has its own bubbling agenda. It has its own way of looking at the world. It has its own worldview. And that worldview is not necessarily compatible with American democracy, as we call it, or our constitutional republic. In fact, there are a whole lot of ideas that are floated in an artistically crafted manner that persuade people to believe something not quite true. Is it a lie? Kinda. Is it a powder sugar coated piece of cardboard? Kinda. Is it the pill inside the peanut butter? Could be. But what it is for certain is not fact-based, truth-sourced information upon which we should be making decisions. In fact, it's intended to be information from a foreign government that influences the way our government operates. Now, if you can imagine yourself in an inner circle, let's go back to the landscaper for an example. Can you imagine if the person in your inner circle that you rely on to make buying decisions came to you and they didn't tell you that their best friend was the salesperson for this alternative mower? This different than everything you already have, different than everything you've already tried. And so this conversation about the Husqvarna, it seems to bubble up organically. But the truth is, this guy or gal who works as a sales rep for the other company has befriended your employee to get the conversation started, and then maybe taken them to dinner a couple of times. Maybe they've been to the golf course or the shooting range, and they've hung out, and they're just pals. And it's just a friend of mine. He mentioned so-and-so, and I tried it out. And it was a great mower. And now all of a sudden you've got a bubbled up conversation that makes its way into the inner circle that was intentionally influenced. The persuasion was on purpose. The leverage was there to look at the relationship and say, how do I take my next door neighbor, my golfing buddy relationship, how do I take that and turn that into money? Well, I do that by influencing them to mention in the inner circle that there's this alternative to what you're doing. There's a better idea. Well, the better idea may or may not be true. It may be that they're less expensive, easier on maintenance, easier to operate. They last longer. It could be that all of those things are true. And it could be that none of that matters, actually. It's just about how much money goes back in the pocket of the salesperson. And since they've got somebody on the inside in the inner circle, a little bit of a thank you might be appropriate. I mean, if I'm going to make a 30% commission on it, maybe I could find a little room for 5 or 10% of that to end up in your golf budget. I'm just saying. Now, see, at certain levels in our government, in our school boards, in our city councils, in our county commissions, in our state governments, we see that through a very particular lens. There's a word for it, actually. It's called corruption, or crony capitalism, or manipulation of the policies. So let's go back to what I started with. The leader's words provide energy and momentum behind an idea, whether that idea is good or bad. Where does the leader get the idea in the first place? Well, the leader gets the idea from their own life experiences and their inner circle. And if those ideas make their way into the inner circle because someone else is influencing them from the outside, then those ideas may come up in a conversation and suddenly become marching orders, even though the idea is bad, nefarious, dangerous, misleading, manipulated, propagandized, or just a great sales pitch. Now, what does that mean for you as a leader? Well, if you're not the highest leader in the organization making those final financial decisions, making those declarations and giving commands, then you're probably someone who has access to that inner circle. So if you're in that inner circle, you need to guard the words that you say, the ideas that you articulate, until you know for a fact that you've well vetted them, that you've looked through every source and you've said to yourself, I trust the information that I've been given. I've pounded this idea out in my own circles, in my own brainstorms, in my own masterminds, and I've got some pretty good insight to this idea. I know what's going to be the outcome of it. I know what it's going to do. Now, if you're at the next level and you're not yet in the inner circle, but you're trying to earn your way into that inner circle, you're an influencer to the inner circle. You might be the aide who says, well, I don't sit in on every committee meeting. I don't have access to those. That's not my privileged space yet, but I'm working my way to get there. I'm not a chief of staff. I don't make final decisions. But when they ask for information on a bill or a process or a committee or a progress or who is this new candidate or who is this new lobbyist or who is this company, they trust my research in making that decision. If that's where you are, then as that influencer, your role is to guard the input you take into your head and the input you give to the inner circle. Now, a lot of people wouldn't think that that's a role of leadership, but I love the way John Maxwell says it. Leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. If you're the staff person on a team, if you're the accountant in a company, if you're the receptionist who has to be the gatekeeper for all these salespeople that come in, you have a very high level of responsibility to determine who gets access to the boss, who gets access to the inner circle, who gets access to the decision makers. That's what a gatekeeper is for. They probably even hired you with that in mind. Tell me a little bit about the tenacity of this individual, their ability to say no, their ability to kindly tell someone to go fishing. If they don't have that skill set, that personality, that demeanor, that vim and vigor, then we're probably going to find that they're not going to work out in this space, because what I really need them to be able to do is tell somebody, no thanks. Appreciate you stopping by. Have a great day. Carry on. Because if they can't do that, then here's what happens. Chaos and confusion at the outer realm, if you will, of the inner circle. Chaos and confusion among everybody on the team. What happened? How does that look? Well, let's say, for an example, you're brand new to the landscape company. We're just using this one hypothetically. And you walk in, you've been there 2 weeks, and you come in the door and you see this beautiful flyer on the table with this beautiful new Husqvarna machine on it. And when you see that, you're like, yes, the last place I worked, we had Husqvarnas. I love those machines. They are so awesome. And just because you saw a sale flyer left by a sales rep laying on the desk, some new energy takes up in you that we're getting these new machines. Now there's a buzz and a bubble at the outer circle level. And then if that energy begins to flow into the one person in the inner circle who also has a contact with the sales rep. Well, now there's a buzz outside that's like the media telling everybody in the public how they should think about a thing. And now there's somebody in the inner circle who's also dropping that same bug in the ear of everybody in the inner circle, hoping that it'll land in the ear of the decision maker. And maybe even the decision maker hears the idea and thinks, well, I never really considered Husqvarna. What would that look like financially? And 2 weeks later, they're all in the store and you're like, wait, where did those come from? Well, you said you liked them better, or you heard they were better, or you just wanted to test it out. And so we're testing it out. We bought a bunch of them and we'll see how it works. And now there's an expenditure and there's a clash, and it's almost like a quarterback controversy. You've got to decide which one's better. But a lot of that started in the conversation, in the hallways, in the parking lot, on the job site, where there were no decision makers there. It was winning in that full court press of the realm of ideas alone. Just a little sales flyer, just a little placard. And so part of the job of the gatekeeper is to understand that when you're the gatekeeper, when you have influence in that capacity, part of your role is to understand that what you do at your desk, what you do in the front office, what you do in the realm of the public, is you begin to expose, because you speak for, on behalf of the leader who's making decisions, you begin to expose the team who isn't in on those inner circle conversations. They're not sitting around the table at the board meetings. They're not sitting there with the sales manager, the equipment manager, the buying manager, the purchasing office. They don't have access to any of that. But they take their clues, they build their energy, they build their job site conversations around the information that you give them, intentionally or otherwise. That's a true story. So if you could just walk in and drop a little sales piece, or drop a little newspaper from a foreign country, or drop a little influence hint, or take somebody to dinner, sometimes it's just guilt by association. I saw so-and-so with so-and-so, and so-and-so is really questionable. So seeing those two together makes me question the other so-and-so. I mean, if that guy's trouble, then hanging out with them, this gal could be, that could be trouble too. Those kinds of insinuations, those appearances of discretion or indiscretion, those make a huge difference too, because again, these bubble up in the outer circle conversations, they make their way to the inner circle conversations, and sometimes you find one of those leaves on your tree, thank you, Tyler Perry, who's not there for the long haul. Their only purpose is to turn brown and fall to the ground. But what they intend to do is to influence your outer circle so that it will influence your inner circle. And sometimes they come in with all the right accolades and all the right authority and all the right resume and all the right connections and all the right opportunities. I have clients now, I've had clients in the past, and I've been the guy who brought somebody onto my team and said, well, you've got a great resume and great connections and I would love for you to take my product or service and promote it to your current or existing or recently past client base. And they come on board and they tell you they're going to do that, but when they leave, you find out they were really here as an intel gathering operation. They want to know what the competitor is up to, and they'll trash talk their former boss, when the truth is they plan to go back there anyway. They came to get all your data to drop some poisonous seeds from the tree branches into your team. You brought them into the inner circle at a higher level because, well, they've got all the resume for that. But they get in your inner circle and they poison the conversation around the table, and then they also poison the outer circle. They begin to drop hints and conversation around what's going on with the boss. Well, I'm in the inner circle. I know. I heard them say blah, blah, blah. Maybe it was a lie. I heard them say blah, blah, blah. Maybe they're just taking words that really aren't a mandate, an instruction, an executive order, so to speak. They're just theory. They're just brainstorming. They're just masterminding a concept. And we're looking for input. Not for you to take that back out there and poison the well of the outside circle, the bubble of the media press in the public eye, They didn't want that out there. Why? Because the words of the leader give energy and momentum to ideas, whether they're good or the bad. And sometimes those words were never uttered. You thought them, you didn't really say them. And somebody who presumes to know what you think said them in your place, carried them back to the inner circle, bubbled them up to the outer circle. Now the public thinks they know what you're thinking, what you want, where you're going. You never really said that. You never really had that thought. It wasn't really your idea, but now all of a sudden, all of your equipment has been swapped out. Half of your team is gone. I know people who've lost their entire team. In fact, I know people who've lost their entire company because someone got in that inner circle and began to sow discord into the inner circle, caused conversations to take place that didn't belong there. They spilled out of the inner circle and destroyed the outer circle. It happens in churches, it happens in nonprofits, it happens in political circles. People lose elections that they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars because people in the inner circle leaked information that was not true. It happens all the time. That's why you hear leaders, John Maxwell, Jack Welch, people at the top of the leadership game, people I've been studying for 3 decades, who will remind you constantly, if it's lonely at the top, you may not be doing it right. But you've got to guard that inner circle for everything you got. Who you allow to hear your inner thoughts matters. How you vet them, well, that's up to you. There are some skills, there are some processes that will help. But if you let them in your inner circle before you vet them, they will say things on your behalf that you would have never imagined. You got to take your time with that. Be careful who you let in your inner circle and make sure you've done your work. And if you're in the inner circle, guard the things that you say to the leader, the ideas that you bring forward, because when they repeat them, they take on a whole new life of their own. And if you're in the outer circle trying to earn your way to the inner circle, make sure that you have sourced, documented, verified every bit of information that you bring forward as an idea or an instruction or a decision. Because once it makes it into the inner circle and into the mouth of the leader, it takes on a new life of its own. And ultimately, you will be held responsible for that. You'll either be promoted into the inner circle because they can trust you, or you'll be done away with because they cannot. Wherever you are in that realm. Leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. Be careful who you let influence you, because who you influence can change everything. The leader's words give energy and momentum to ideas, good or bad. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I encourage you to go to storypoweracademy.com and check it out. Look at the different classes, the different levels, the different things that are available. You can take a lot of them a la carte. But spend some time there and see if that's the kind of thing that would change the way you communicate as a leader, as a pastor, as a counselor, as a political leader. And if that will help you, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, only 10 people in the elite speakers. You will have to apply for that. But if you're a candidate, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm J Loren Norris with Story Power Academy. I look forward to seeing you inside.